Welcome to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss science fiction, fantasy, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Since the first time that I ever saw Star Wars, I was hooked. And the first Star Wars film that I ever saw was the original film, now known as Star Wars 4: A New Hope. I remember sitting in the darkened theater and seeing that cruiser from Alderaan being fired upon by the much larger Imperial Star Destroyer that was pursuing it at the beginning of the film, after hearing John Williams' amazing music, then seeing that Star Destroyer practically fill the screen as it continued to fire upon the cruiser. Then, when the action moved inside of the cruiser, the audience was introduced to the droids R2-D2 and C-3PO, and all of the action that ensued with the ship's crew taking defensive positions for the expected boarding by Imperial stormtroopers that they knew was about to happen. Then, sure enough, the Imperial stormtroopers entered after breaking through the cruiser's door, and the laser blasts began, followed not long thereafter by the menacing Darth Vader. From start to finish, that entire film captivated me, as did the next two films that followed, Star Wars V, The Empire Strikes Back, and Star Wars VI, Return of the Jedi. And what captivated me wasn't just the action or special effects in the films. It was the characters, the stories, and the mystical force. All of these things created an amazing universe that I and millions of other people fell in love with. I overall enjoyed the prequels when they came out years later, but I never experienced the same love for them as I had for the original trilogy. Still, they came from the mind of George Lucas, and the events that led to the Clone Wars, the destruction of the Jedi Order, and the establishment of the Galactic Empire in place of the Republic was very well done. After the prequels were released, I wasn't sure whether George Lucas would ever produce a sequel trilogy, but I didn't really expect it to happen. I did, however, enjoy watching the animated Clone Wars and Rebels TV series when they came out after the prequels. But when George Lucas decided to sell his beloved Lucasfilm and the Star Wars franchise to Disney in late 2012, I wasn't sure what to think. I understood and respected his desire not to keep going due to his age, and I hoped that Disney would take good care of both Lucasfilm and Star Wars in his much-deserved retirement. And when George Lucas made Kathleen Kennedy the president of Lucasfilm, and she said during an interview in late 2012, while sitting right next to him,
"The main thing is to protect these characters, make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them."
I believed her because George Lucas trusted her, and I felt that he wouldn't have put her in charge of Lucasfilm or sold it and Star Wars to Disney unless he truly believed that they would be good caretakers of his creations and be able to lead them into the future without him. Retrospectively, though, how wrong we both were. In this first video about my declining interest in Star Wars, I decided to break it up into several videos to focus on each of the specific reasons for the decline. And this first video is about broken promises, and more specifically, Kathleen Kennedy's broken promises. Now, while some of you may disagree and say that she didn't break her promises to George Lucas, in my opinion, she did. When George gave her the helm at Lucasfilm as its president in October 2012, she took on an immense responsibility. But having promised that she was going to protect the characters that George Lucas had created over 35 years before in 1977, I never could have conceived that she would undermine everything that he had done. When Disney and Lucasfilm announced that they were going to produce a new Star Wars sequel trilogy, I was cautiously excited at the prospect. And when the first Disney sequel trilogy film was released in 2015, Star Wars VII: The Force Awakens, I was faithfully there on opening night, and I was so impressed and happy with the film, even though it was essentially a remake of A New Hope. The fact that they had essentially undone Han Solo's growth from being a lowly smuggler to a rebel general in the original trilogy by having him backslide into that former profession he'd once had, albeit as a more irresponsible version of his younger self, I wasn't immediately bothered by that too much at the time. And, in fact, I saw that film several times while it played in theaters, which was something that I hadn't done in years. I also wasn't bothered too much early on by some of the other issues that this first sequel film had, but I will get into those issues in later videos. In the months following the release of The Force Awakens, my attitude towards Star Wars and the direction it was going under Kathleen Kennedy and Bob Iger was good. But that quickly changed immediately after I saw Star Wars 8: The Last Jedi on opening night in 2017. On opening night in 2015, when I was going to watch The Force Awakens, I well remember the long lines of people waiting to enter the theater, as well as the loud and excited people who had just seen earlier showings and were so excited by what they had seen as they were leaving the theater. But that didn't happen on opening night with The Last Jedi. I was in the first showing, and when the lights came up and people began to leave the theater, other than the sounds of people gathering their belongings and walking out, the silence was deafening. No one was talking. No one was smiling. Everyone who'd just watched The Last Jedi was just as confused and bewildered by what they had just seen as I was. And as I drove home, I asked myself, should I have liked it? Did I like it at all? What did I just watch? Unlike The Force Awakens, I didn't go back and watch The Last Jedi again while it was in theaters, but I did purchase a copy on Blu-ray when it became available in 2018 so that I could watch it again at home. And when I did watch the film again, I tried to find things in the film that I thought I could like, but it was simply no use. After watching it several times, I finally had to admit to myself that I didn't like the movie. And one of the main reasons why I didn't like it was because of what Rian Johnson had done to Luke Skywalker. The character that Mark Hamill portrayed in The Last Jedi was nothing like the Luke Skywalker of the original trilogy. This Luke Skywalker was a demoralized, disillusioned, and cynical curmudgeon who wanted nothing to do with anyone, not even his own sister or the resistance that was trying to fight against the First Order. He had abandoned everything, including any hope or optimism that he once had. Then he'd humiliate himself by getting blue milk from the giant tit on a large sea creature nestled against the side of the island that he lived on.
The main thing is to protect these characters, make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them.
This was repulsive. Not just seeing Luke milking the giant sea creature, but the complete destruction and emasculation of the character. And this wasn't a partial emasculation. Luke Skywalker had been completely 100% emasculated, and the two people responsible for it weren't any of the characters in the film. The two people responsible were Kathleen Kennedy and Rian Johnson. When I came to this realization, I knew immediately that Kathleen Kennedy had lied to George Lucas and the entire Star Wars fandom. To emasculate one of the most important heroes and protagonists in the history of cinema, to reduce him to a pathetic, homeless-like nobody who'd given up on absolutely everything that he had ever believed in and had striven to become, this wasn't just a matter of humiliating the character. This was a deliberate humiliation of George Lucas himself and every fan who had ever loved the character of Luke Skywalker. Kathleen Kennedy hadn't just broken her promise to protect the characters that George Lucas had created. She had gone out of her way to emasculate and destroy them. This realization was horrible to me because, like everyone else who had believed and trusted her, including George Lucas, we had all been utterly lied to. But The Last Jedi made it glaringly obvious that Kathleen Kennedy wanted her female protagonist, Rey, to be the center of the Star Wars universe. And to achieve that, she decided to destroy the much-beloved male protagonist that George Lucas had created. And sadly, the emasculation of Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi was just the tip of the iceberg. Because only 2 years later, when Episode 9 was released, the poorly named The Rise of Skywalker, the full extent of Kathleen Kennedy's deliberate destruction of George Lucas's Star Wars was plain for all to see. Because even before any of the action began in J.J. Abrams' Episode 9, which I had waited several weeks to see instead of going on opening night, with absolutely no build-up, no preparation, and not even the slightest suggestion in the previous two films, Episode 9's opening crawl announced that Emperor Palpatine was back. So in a single short sentence, not only was the entire original trilogy thoroughly retconned and made utterly pointless, so were the prequels, and the fully emasculated Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi could now share in the apparent failure with his father Anakin, who he had turned back to the light side of the Force, to destroy Palpatine as the entire world has watched at the end of Star Wars VI, Return of the Jedi. While I didn't like The Last Jedi, I was utterly disgusted by Episode 9, which I have never watched again after seeing it that one time in the theater because I have no desire to do so again. I won't even watch The Force Awakens or The Last Jedi anymore either because I know what they lead into. The dumpster fire of a film that Episode 9 is, was Kathleen Kennedy's coup de grace to rip the heart out of Star Wars so that her Force's female protagonist, Rey Palpatine, could become the ultimate overpowered hero in the Star Wars universe, because she gets to kill Palpatine at the end of the film. Kathleen Kennedy didn't protect the characters and Star Wars universe as she promised George Lucas in 2012. She destroyed them. In the aftermath of Disney's disastrous sequel trilogy, I still like most of everything that came before it, and I like Rogue One. In fact, Rogue One is the only Disney Star Wars film that I actually like. I've also watched and liked The Mandalorian. I haven't yet watched the Book of Boba Fett, but I'm planning to, as well as the upcoming Obi-Wan Kenobi series when it comes out. I'm hopeful that these streamed series will help to improve my lowered interest in the Star Wars franchise. But what would truly boost my interest would be if Kathleen Kennedy is replaced as president of Lucasfilm. Kathleen Kennedy has not only squandered her time as president of Lucasfilm, she used the authority that the position gave her to retcon and mutilate the Star Wars franchise to push her own political agenda with no concern whatsoever for the consequences. Even though so many people had entrusted her as the head of Lucasfilm, all of that trust was entirely misplaced, and not even Bob Chapek, the current Disney CEO, has the balls to get rid of her. And nearly 10 years after Disney purchased Lucasfilm and Star Wars from George Lucas, I'd be surprised if they have even broken even yet, since the sequel suffered from diminishing returns and the one-off film Solo: A Star Wars Story lost money, which was the first time that a Star Wars movie has ever lost money at the box office. Kathleen Kennedy's broken promises to George Lucas and the entire Star Wars fandom are a significant factor why my own interest in the franchise has declined in recent years. I'll be covering more factors in future videos, but I would love to hear what your own experiences have been like if you would like to share them in the comments below, and whether your own interest in Star Wars has also suffered. Thank you for watching today, and thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our YouTube channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button below, and please feel free to share a comment. If you would like to see more of our videos in the future and help support this channel, please subscribe right now by clicking on the red subscribe button below. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.